Hello, are you here to debate?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. What's your name, age, and pronouns?
Ashton, he, him, and 32.
Ashton, he, him, 32. All right,
hmm
Ashton, what topic do you disagree with on the board?
I actually wanted to go into be discussing LGBTQIA plus in school. I wanted to kind of run through that. I tend to think that school has a really strong foundation in certain core academic subjects, right? And I think that you can advance like in certain subjects, and get to a bigger point. But like the fundamentals of early schooling, I think it's best to give like kids creative play for sure. Like take like religion, right? Like introducing religion to a kid at a really early age, kind of a tough thing to do and probably not great. Instead, like let them discover books and maybe read into those books. And of course, I know that's going to go into the ban of those books in libraries. But I want to start there for sure.
Sure. I'm just confused. Do you think that we shouldn't be teaching topics surrounding the LGBTQ in schools? I'm just a little.
Yeah, no, I think that our schools, we should get them down to like a very fundamental, rudimentary like science on main four subjects, right? Like
What are those
four or
main four
five.
subjects?
And yeah, I would definitely say, starting mathematics, science, history, English slash literature, reading comprehension, but also the ability to write. I think those are pretty core things. I would say optionally, probably some kind of physical education is a good sense too. And I know that, of course, again, you could advance that later to sexual health, et cetera, which definitely should still be on the table. But the fundamental stuff, like in elementary, and of course, I think we could debate like at what point elementary is and isn't, especially because if sorry, my cat's going to meow a lot. I'm so sorry. Especially because if you look in the idea of like, okay, well, maybe we could change the age of that. And if you look at kids and how they develop now comparatively to like just 50 to 100 years ago, we could maybe take and argue like they're going to be a little more mature with subject matter and social material. So we could like kind of change where that limitation is. But I think like the fundamental stuff, we should probably not include any kind of sexual nature like in those topics or lessons, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why if it's folded. I don't know why it would be a problem if it's folded. Like LGBTQI plus topics like Stonewall, like things like that. Why couldn't that just be folded into history? Why couldn't the social aspects just be folded into social studies? What would be the issue with
Right, on
this?
the advanced, like to
Why
get
is
to an
what?
like when they're
Wait, you
when they're
can't
older and they can
teach.
understand the
But
significance of
Ashton,
Stonewall.
you can't teach an advanced course without first laying the fundamentals. Like I can't teach a kid
Which
algebra who's never learned 1 + 1 = 2.
Right. So then wouldn't you also agree that things like gender dysphoria or issues of, society and LGBTQIA topics are a much more advanced topic to be teaching a kid, and the fundamental there is not a
No,
fundamental there, you know what I
disagree.
mean, that falls under that. Like if you're going to teach
Disagree.
history as a fundamental,
Wait,
then you would teach the
wait. I can
importance
teach.
of human.
Hold on. I can teach the fundamentals real quick. Like, let's say I have a classroom full of kindergartners. Here's a fundamental. Hey,
Okay.
kids. Sometimes men like men, and sometimes a kid can have two daddies. There's your fundamental.
But you see how you're putting a connotation there that kind of doesn't, it's not true.
What's
Like
not true?
you have to understand
Men
for a
liking men
kid's
is not true.
perspective, humans like humans. You see what I'm saying here? Like you're putting a connotation on like that's
What?
romantic, and I think that screws up the
You
fundamental. Yeah,
think?
because you were like,
Wait. You
well,
think?
sometimes
You
men
think
can like a
kids
man,
don't?
but to a
You think?
kid's
Hold on. Hold on. Hold
perspective,
on.
it's
Hold
a
on.
friend to a
You think?
friend.
You think kindergartners don't already have an understanding about romantic love?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that a teacher shouldn't be laying an education for that to them yet, that they should discover that on their own and advance that discovery after having some kind of fundamental foundation. Otherwise, you lay a fundamental foundation for gender dysphoria, and I think that's a dangerous thing to do. We've already seen a
Gender.
weird
Wait.
increase,
When do you?
including,
Okay, hold on, because you're doing a lot of presupposing here that I think you're missing a lot of fundamental things. First of all, gender
okay,
dysphoria starts to show itself typically around age 7. So these kids are
okay.
already experiencing gender dysphoria, but you're saying we
And,
can't
but
talk
again,
to them about things they're experiencing?
Again, so a few things. One, we're talking preschool to kindergarten. If 7 and 8 is where we're starting to see signs of gender dysphoria, then at that point, that's where that action needs to be taken. But like the fundamentals below that, I don't think need to include that. I think if at some point a kid maybe starts showing signs and then progresses further, then yeah, like that's something you can discuss with the kid. And that's a point that like, the kid has to advance that themselves. You can't just start being like, well, this is exactly the way it is. I mean, if LGBTQIA topics have taught me anything, it's that it's more of a like, I don't want to say a rainbow because I don't want to sound like, redundant, but it's a large creative spectrum, right? So shouldn't that large creative spectrum be something that's explored in its entirety, not something that's weirdly rooted in some kind of social propaganda, because that's what it's turning into. And I think if we were to like break down why conservatives are very, very scared of that topic in the education system, it's this right here. They're terrified of some kind of propaganda that takes place.
It sounds like they're terrified because they don't actually know anything, right? It sounds like they're terrified that there's this, like they think there's this propaganda thing happening when all that's really happening is we're teaching kids some stuff that these kids are already going through. That's not propaganda. Oh. We're not creating more. Let me just explain it this way. Teaching children that gender dysphoria does not create more kids who have gender dysphoria. It just allows kids who have gender dysphoria to stop feeling like shit, because they finally have words to put to the feelings they're feeling.
So let me controversially say a few things to that, right? Every kid has a trauma they go through. Of course, all of us have our own, and even our own issues with gender dysphoria. I think everyone some way fundamentally comes into, So without a doubt, I mean, the further psychology of the feminine side to the subconscious is clearly obvious to our human nature, without a doubt, the nurture and nature divide. All of that is very clearly there and something that could be advanced in one's understanding. But when you do look at certain numbers, take like, and I know it sounds like a crazy talking point, but take some of these famous celebrities who have these multiple like LGBTQ plus children that they've almost seemingly coerced into that nature. And I know it's like, oh no, it's absolutely natural. Like they've embraced it very, very well, even though it kind of doesn't really match the statistical numbers here. They have seemingly embraced it so much that it almost seems like they've pushed their kids into this. And again, I know I'm not saying 100% that's what's happened here, but if you look from the right side of the sphere and you go, I'm seeing all of these left-wing celebrities push their kids into the LGBTQ plus realm.
Yeah, you're presupposing that children are being pushed into this. That's not happening anywhere. It's quite literally not.
Okay,
it's not happening. Kids aren't being pushed into the LGBTQ.
If we were to go through that list of actresses that I have done this, all of their children, and they have like 4 children. How is it possible that all 4 of their children are LGBTQIA plus on such a huge extreme level? Wouldn't it make more sense that they would maybe naturally discover those things? I'm not saying that it's an impossibility. What I'm saying is that it clearly, to one side of the spectrum, are seeing it like propaganda. They're like, look how extreme this has become. And you look in the media world, there is literally,
this is quite literally a confirmation bias.
Incentive. Say that again?
This is quite literally a confirmation bias.
Sorry, I'm sorry. What do you mean? Could you repeat that? It's a little hard to hear. Literally a confirmation.
This is like a confirmation bias, yeah. You're specifically looking for this, so you're seeing this. Because there are tons of families that have there are tons of families that have like 5 kids and none of them are gay. Right? You're quite literally looking at a bias.
Right.
Here.
That wouldn't matter if the statistics didn't show that LGBTQIA is a minority of the population and not the majority. So that would be your issue there. The numbers don't already match. And again, this confirmation bias wouldn't exist if there clearly wasn't incentive in the media and in the public and in the politics of it. And I think that's a problem. I think if you successfully, and this is to regress back to our original point, I think if you successfully decouple, this kind of strange title of LGBTQ plus whatever, if you decouple that and instead come at the situation with a foundation of psychology and sociology on a fundamental level, I think that wins people over more than what is kind of feel like a bit of a propaganda.
But you're not going off of a fundamental understanding of psychology. Because if you did, you would know that children understand these concepts starting at like 4 to 5. You're the
I would
person
also
who, you're the
no.
person who,
So
yes, you are the person right now
I,
who is coming at this from a misunderstanding of psychology.
so I do have I do have a degree, and I
You
do
do. Jordan
understand quite a bit
Peterson
of
has a
psychology. And
psychological
I'll
degree.
tell you,
Hold on. I just
and,
want to point
and
something out here. I just want to point something out. Having a degree doesn't mean shit, right? Jordan Peterson has a
no, but we
fucking.
did have to
Hold
take
on.
a we did have to take psych classes.
Stop. Jordan Peterson has a PhD in psychology and based his whole practice off of a fundamental misunderstanding of how lobsters act in social settings. So having a PhD doesn't mean anything. Like having
Okay, so
having a
first off,
degree doesn't
I'm not
necessarily
saying
mean you understand these concepts.
okay, so like three things. One, that's one particular person. Two, I didn't say I had a PhD. And three, more
I said
importantly,
he
I'm
had a
trying to
PhD.
explain that they gave us fundamental psychology classes. So I'm gonna say that things like the schema, which have early development and take a long while to fully develop someone's psychology, they have to go through a full level of consciousness, and then subconsciousness that has later growth in their life they fully understand. A self-awareness that can only occur by understanding things like the animus and understanding an idea that the feminine eventually gets brought out in the masculine, and vice versa. There is quite literally like a back and forth dynamic that exists between these two natures, in that a child isn't going to understand this fundamentally or even go through it naturally if we weirdly curate their experience to this like kind of, I don't know, messed up robotic way of LGBTQIA plus. I think it's the wrong way to go about it.
So that would be incorrect.
Okay.
So especially because you're bringing up like you're bringing up like schemas, right? So like I just want to say again, when we look at the way humans develop, especially the way human brains develop to understand gender, right? Humans can have an understanding of their own gender by ages 3 to 4. 3 to 4 years is enough time for schemas to solidify in your long-term memory. Yes, they are. Yes, it is.
To solidify, okay,
Yes.
and to be, I'm sorry, like you know that even the brain itself hasn't fully has a long journey of full development.
Brains never. Wait.
Okay,
so do you just? This is just showing me. This is just showing me that you maybe have a misunderstanding of this. The brain never stops developing. Your brain is always developing. The study that said your brain stops developing at 25 was a lie. You know that, right? Like it was made up.
Fine, but as far as the idea that your brain still has development to go past the age of 3 to 4 is clearly understood, right? Like we both clearly understand that you have a long road ahead of you. And to be fair, if we're to really divulge into this, like the literal experience someone has is going to shape their adolescence. We both understand this, right? So shouldn't it make sense that there's a natural exploration of what that shape might come to be, rather than forcing someone into something?
Again, you're coming up with the idea that people are being forced into things. They aren't. Who's being forced into something? Give me an example of give me an actual concrete example of a child being forced into the LGBTQ.
Sure. If we're going to do specific ones, then that famous Transformers actress from the Transformers series, her children she's put them all in LGBTQIA plus fashion and apparel.
What is LGBT? What is LGBT? Hold on. What is LGBTQ fashion?
Oh, they're boys dressed as girls. They're doing full transition. She has them in a full transition. Very early ages.
Okay. So here's a few things you need to understand. If you're speaking about Megan Fox and you're speaking about Megan Fox's children, what it appears to be happening, because this is what we have based on the evidence, which is just Megan Fox taking pictures with her kids, is that she allows her children to freely express themselves in dress in whatever way they want. That's not forcing them. Hold on. Stop.
Right?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Allowing your children to wear whatever clothes they want does not determine your children's gender identity.
No. But exposing it to millions of people in the country certainly has an effect.
Oh, I don't know. Then maybe stop. Maybe tell people to stop taking pictures of her kids. I don't know. Maybe tell people to stop taking pictures of her kids. I don't know. That's just a thought.
Not just to that. Well,
Holy shit,
okay,
dude.
I don't disagree with, people not doing that. I do
Jesus.
certainly think paparazzi is a terrible thing. I'm definitely not a big fan of that stuff. But regardless, it's not just the people too; it's the people around them and themselves, right? I mean, you have to understand that if you're like 16, 17, you look at pictures of yourself when you're younger, and it can be very informative, and also not to mention how you address people in public. The Japanese philosophy of like, you have the mask you wear to everyone, the mask you wear to your close people, and just the one that's to yourself. I know it's just a philosophy, but you can understand the importance, right? Like, you build that over time. You build the way you present yourself to people over
Yeah,
time.
I just want to point out.
careful-
I just want to point out that you haven't been able to give me an example here. You've said, well, look at the way
I
Megan
think the
Fox.
Megan Fox example fits
Except it's
perfectly. I don't
not.
see why it doesn't.
Except you have zero evidence that Megan Fox is forcing her kids into anything. You have zero evidence
except
of
the
this.
fact that it statistically doesn't doesn't match.
You don't have evidence that her kids are all part of the LGBTQ.
Okay, so then let me give you more. Let me go through more. Balenciaga put out fetish wear on children and put it in photographs. And we agree you shouldn't be like, don't get me wrong, like you're like, oh,
what
well,
does that have to do with the LGBTQ?
Don't take photos. But Balenciaga takes photos
what does
money.
this have to do with the LGBTQ? Balenciaga is not an LGBTQ brand.
LGBTQIA plus is very pro sexual health and sexual liberation. Am I wrong?
I'm sorry. Do you think sexual
Am I wrong
liberation?
in that?
Do you think sexual liberation applies to kids when we say this?
Do y'all dress them in fetish
No,
wear?
because
What's going on here?
no, shut the fuck up. Your only example here is Balenciaga, which is an adult brand that's not even geared towards the LGBTQ. Balenciaga is mostly geared towards straight women. What are you talking about?
So then let's talk about fetish wear.
Give a fucking example, dog.
I've
Give an
gone to
actual
LGBTQ
example.
I've been to the Pride Parade multiple times. I've walked in the Pride Parade, and the amount of people in there that are wearing fetish wear, I think, has gone overbound. I think we need to start having some kind of consciousness to children being there. Say that again?
It's just you keep naming non-examples. I asked you for an example.
I just referenced the Pride Parade.
Hold on.
One of the biggest events
I asked you specifically. I asked you for an example.
The Pride Parade is a specific example.
Stop. No, it's not. Do you know how many Pride parades? Do you know how many fucking Pride parades happen in the country every year? Just saying Pride parades is not a specific example.
Nudity and fetish wear.
I've been to so many Pride parades that had zero nudity. I've been to so many Pride parades that had zero nudity. Just saying Pride parades is not an example. So again, I'm gonna say this again. My ask of you was to give an example of children being quote unquote indoctrinated into the LGBTQ, and you haven't given this. You haven't been able to give one example.
I've given you multiple examples. I've given you
no, you haven't.
3 specific examples.
No,
of
you didn't.
Being put
You gave Megan Fox's kids. You gave Megan that wait.
Is clearly LGBTQIA
Holy shit.
and affiliated.
No, it isn't.
Okay, you say no, it isn't. I think that if you look at it from a certain
not.
angle and perspective, it clearly is, and it's going to
if
influence
you stop
the
being
right
a little,
wing.
I think if you stop being a baby, if you stop being a baby and give an actual example. Your examples were, well, Megan Fox did this. Where's the evidence that Megan Fox's children are part of the LGBTQ? Where is it? You're just making. You are making an inference about children.
Transition those kids, or is not affiliated to LGBTQIA+?
You're making an inference about literal children that you don't know because you're assuming that these kids were indoctrinated. That's what you're doing.
I have clearly linked and connected that these topics, which clearly you feel very passionate about, that things like sexual liberation are clearly having an overstay in what would be called the LGBTQI+, and that instead we should attack it from a different angle and go from psychology or a form of history that is a rooted foundation that is easy for children and is not going to politicize the issue and scare off conservatives from ever wanting to.
I don't give a fuck about scaring off conservatives, okay? I don't give a fuck about that.
Okay.
Fuck conservatives,
okay? That's fine.
Okay? Full stop. Let me explain something to you really quickly. Let me explain something so that so that you can have some sort of understanding about what's actually happening. What's actually happening is we've done the research. We know, based on psychological research, when children start to gender other things. We know that when children start to gender themselves, we know when gender dysphoria starts to show its head. You go, well, I don't believe in that. I don't know. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate based on no evidence.
I didn't say that.
based
did
on
not
no
say
evidence.
that.
Yeah, you did. You said
I
you
did
didn't
not
think it was
say that.
accurate.
That
Yes,
was
you
not
did.
the foundation of my discussion at
you
all.
said, hold on. You said you didn't think it was accurate. Don't try to twist it now, because yes, you did.
Okay, I mean, we can go back into the foundation of what I said, but we both know that was not the foundation of my argument.
Except it was.
I'm not saying that gender dysphoria doesn't exist at a certain age.
I didn't say you said. I didn't.
In
I
fact,
didn't
if we
say
rewind
that
from the beginning,
I didn't
used
say
gender
you said
dysphoria
that.
in my discussion.
This is how I know you're listening to respond.
You personated
This is
me
how I
going,
know
"Oh,
you're
don't believe
listening.
that."
You're listening to respond, not listening to actually hear what I'm saying. So
Okay, continue.
Second of all, you then went on to misrepresent Megan Fox, to misrepresent Pride parades, to fucking bring up Balenciaga, which has no real connection to the conversation because it's an adult brand that sells to primarily like cisgender straight women. So like you're not connecting any of these things. You're just making claims that, well, the LGBTQ is hypersexualized. Straight people are hypersexualized. Are you kidding me? Have you been to a sporting event in the last 20 years? Have you watched the cheerleaders?
Yeah, they've had to regulate a lot of that stuff. I mean, you remember the Bud Light commercials of back in the day where they were basically showing porn stars on the commercials?
They still do this.
They've stopped doing that because they realized it was a bad idea.
They still do it. Fucking Christ,
if you
bro.
look at, I mean,
this is
I mean,
crazy.
yeah, sure,
Bye-bye. Shout out to the person that tipped. I can't fucking do this fucking bullshit, bro. Not if you're going to keep interrupting every 4 fucking seconds. Like, come the fuck on, dude.